generosity and service are very important parts of my life because I've always felt it highly important to put other people first. In fact, one of the first books that I wrote was entitled Finding True Happiness. And that book, one of the things was about putting others first. And that's what Jesus talked about in his word, was this life is not about us. Many people get the wrong impression about life, and they think that life is all about me, myself, and I, and making myself better and lifting myself up. But Jesus spent his entire life on this earth putting others first. He gave his life for others, and then he told us to follow in his footsteps. And we, in turn, need to put others first. And I'm always trying as much and every way I can to put others first in my life. Every place I've ever worked, I've made it an important part of my job to get to know everybody in the office, to always go around checking on other people, putting little gifts on people's desks, just doing something to brighten people's day. When I go out and I speak at cancer events and other things like that, I don't hardly ever charge money because I'm not doing it to make money. I'm doing it to encourage and inspire people and help other people to overcome the problems and the difficulties in their life. So putting others first, I would say that to me, that is my life. Without it, I would have nothing to do. At 4 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor told my parents I had 1 week to live, and my chances were 0. Well, that was 43 years ago, so it's been a long week. Well, as a result of the cancer and the problems that came from all the cancer and treatment, my vocal cords are paralyzed, my breath is stunted, and every day I face problems and difficulties that I have to face. Well, when I was growing up in elementary school and stuff, all the kids would laugh and make fun of me because of the way I talked, and because I was short, and because I had problems. And I was basically faced with 2 choices. Number 1, I could allow these problems and things and trials that I faced to destroy my life and say, forget it, I can't do anything with my life. Or I could realize that God put these problems in my life because he had a plan for my life. And when I was in the 5th grade, I finally realized what that plan was. And God told me to preach. Many people told me, well, there's no way you can preach. You're short, you talk funny, you have all these difficulties and problems that you face every day. And they were right in a way. In my own strength, I couldn't preach. I couldn't do what God wanted me to do. But I found that through Christ, like the Bible says, I can do all things. And in the 5th grade, I started preaching. Now, looking back on it, I don't know what I preached about back then, but I just knew that God had given me cancer because he wanted me to reach out to others and to help others. And I began to share my story and share my life with other people. And the more I shared my story, the more I shared my life, the more people told me, wow, Josh, your story is such an inspiration. What you do for others is such an inspiration. Everybody in the world needs to hear your story. Everybody in the world needs to hear you. And that began my day of realizing I can do a lot more with my life when I put others first and when I seek to make a difference in other people's lives. Well, of course, like most people, when I was young, I had my dreams of being a multi-millionaire and driving a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari and all that kind of stuff. And kind of, I set out in a way to do that, a little on the side. I mean, I always tried to be a speaker and a preacher and everything, but I also had dreams of what I wanted in my life, what was important to me. But the more I realized that God's plan isn't always our plan, and God doesn't necessarily promise that He's going to bless us all with millions of dollars and stuff like that. No, many times, like I said at the beginning, God, or Jesus Christ, when He was here on this earth, He lived His entire life for others. And the closer I got in my relationship with God, and the closer I grew in my faith and gave my heart and my life to Him, the less important things and possessions and stuff like that became to me. And the more important helping other people became to me. And the more important giving my life to others, giving everything that I had to others became to me. Now, I've written 4 books, but I've never charged any money for any of my books. I pay myself to print them and then I hand them out for free. Because I'm like, God has given me enough money to print these books. So I only print 100 at a time, but I print 100 books and then I hand them out. Because that it's more important to me that people read what's in the book and that changes and inspires their life than for me to make $2 or $3 off the book. And just like with my life, the closer I walk with God, the more I give my heart and my life to Him, the less this world means to me, and the more following in His footsteps means to me. When I first started out speaking, and I felt like God wanted me to preach, well, I graduated from Bible college, and I thought that I was going to become a preacher. I was going to travel around the world and preach, and that was going to be what I was going to do. Well, God called me to preach, but He forgot to call anybody to listen. And nobody would invite me to come preach in their churches. And I would email, this was before email, because I would send out letters, and I would call people, and I would talk to them on the phone, and of course, over the phone, they couldn't understand me, and so they would hang up the phone. And I would send my letters to churches, and they never heard of me, so they wouldn't even write back. And so, eventually, I had to get a job, because you have to pay your bills. And so I got a job doing computer work, and I trained myself how to do computer work. Well, I began to wonder, and I thought, well, God, I thought you wanted me to preach and share my story, but now I'm working on computers. What does that have to do with sharing my story? But the more I learned about computers, and I learned about building web pages and websites, one day it occurred to me that I could put my story on the internet, and I could share my story over the web. And I set up my first web page back in 1998, and I began to share my story. And I began to get letters from people all over, or emails from people all over the world saying, wow, thank you for sharing your story. Your story just changed my life. And I began to see that God's plan was completely different than my plan. I thought when God called me to preach that He wanted me to literally preach in churches and stuff. But then I began to realize that He wanted me to share my story in a different way. And I began to share my story over the web. And then people were like, okay, Josh, people at churches, they listen to you, they hear your story, But other people need to hear your story. People that might not go to church. People that might not even know about God. They also need to hear your story. And I had one person come up to me and say, you know, Josh, if you just stop talking about God in your story, if you just get up there and tell your story and talk about motivation and doing things with your life and that sort of thing, I bet you can become rich and famous off of telling your story. And I thought for a minute, and I said, well, yeah, you're probably right. But if I didn't talk about God, I wouldn't have a story. Because without God, I wouldn't be here. And God is my story. My story is God working in my life. And how that 43 years ago, God gave me cancer. Now, 43 years ago, when I had cancer, that wasn't fun. That was terrible. It was painful. It was difficult. Did I understand what God's plan was back then? No. All I knew was people were sticking needles in me. People were putting me on the operating table. People were doing painful things to me. But now, looking back on it, I can understand how it was all part of God's plan for my life. And everything that happens in our life is part of God's plan. Now, God's plan isn't necessarily our plan. And many times, when God works His plan in our life, we don't understand what God is doing at the beginning. And many times, we may never, or we may not understand it for years and years. But when we finally look back and we see all that God has done in our life through what His plan was, we can understand that this life isn't about us, it's about God. Now I realize that many people, when they first give their life to God, they think that immediately everything's going to change, and their life is just suddenly going to be sunshine and roses. And when pain and difficulty comes along, or when they realize that the road isn't always easy, it's difficult at times, they quit and they give up. Now we have to understand, as I mentioned before, God's plan is not always our plan. And the key is that we have to learn to trust Him. We have to learn that no matter what happens in our life, it's all part of God's plan. And I realize, especially for new believers, that giving up everything and trusting God is not natural. It's not human. It's not the way that people live. And it's not the way that this world lives. Many people have come to me in my life and said, well, if you did this or this or this with your life, you could make more money, or that would make more sense. And I have tried to explain to them, yes, but my life isn't about making money. My life isn't about making sense. My life is about following God and obeying what He wants and trusting Him. And many people will look at me like, what are you talking about? Because they don't understand. And the thing that we have to learn is that Almighty God is in control of everything. Now, God created our life. He's the one who made us. Now, don't we think that if God made us and created us, He knows a lot better what to do with our life than we do? The thing is that we keep trying to think and thinking we know better than God. And we read passages in the Bible that say, give up your life, surrender everything to God, follow God, give to others. In fact, when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, what do I do to follow you? Jesus said, sell everything that you have and follow me. Well, that rich young ruler was like, what? I'm not going to sell everything I have. That's too much. He didn't understand that God's plan is perfect. He and his life were too wrapped up in all of his possessions. And many times our life is all wrapped up and entangled in our possessions, in our career, in many various things. And for us to let go of all of that and say, okay, Lord, I give you my life. You can do with it whatever you want. It's not easy. It's not something that comes naturally. And for some people, it's a very quick process. For some people, it takes a long time for them to learn. And they gradually give more and more and more of their life to God. And they understand that the more they give to God, the happier they are. The more they give, the more peace they find. The more they give, the more happiness and joy they bring, not only to their life, but to the lives of others as well. Now when the Bible talks about giving, it shows that we are to give of our time and of our talent and of our treasure. And a lot of people think, oh well, I give X number of dollars every year to this church or this organization, so that's all I have to give. But really, God doesn't need our money. God needs our life. And giving our money is important because that's part of our life. But also, we need to give our time and our talent. And when we say give our time, I mean, that doesn't mean that we have to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week out serving people or helping people. I mean, if we could, that'd be great. But it's important that we learn to give of our time. We spend so much of our time on entertainment and pleasure when we should put so much more of our effort on helping others and finding joy and happiness that way. And then we give of our treasure, we give of our money, we help other people. And that's also important. The most important thing is that we give ourselves. And you see, when we give ourselves and give Him everything, that includes our time, our talent, our treasure. Because if we give Him all of our life, that is everything included in our life. Our time, our talent, our treasure. Now, He may have different ways of using our time, our talent, and our treasure. For some people, it's not always the same. Some people, they give their life to God, and He says, alright, I want you to go to Africa as a missionary. Well, another person gives their life to God, and He says, alright, I want you to go and work for this organization and make millions of dollars and take most of that money and send it to that guy that I just sent to Africa. You see, God has a different plan for different people's lives. But the key is that we give Him everything. Now, when we give Him everything, if He says, okay, it's all in my possession now, I don't necessarily need this or that right now, that's fine for us to drive a nice car, to have a nice house, to go on vacation or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as that's part of God's plan for your life. Now, some people, like I mentioned, think, well, I give X number of dollars a year to the church, and that's enough. And then some people are like, well, I give 1 hour a week. I teach a Sunday school class, or 2 or 3 hours preparing for it. And they think, okay, I give God that much of my life, the rest of it, I can do what I want to do. But Jesus, when He was here on this earth, He gave everything. In fact, He gave His life. He died for us. We can't say, okay, I've given this much. I must be giving you more. We should never, number one, you should never outgive God. And the more we give of our time, our talent, and our treasures to God, the more we get back in return. God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you no matter what happens. I will always meet and supply all of your needs. Nobody else in the world can make those promises and keep them. Now some people might make them, but they can't keep them. But God is Almighty God. He can do whatever He wants. And so, for us to hold back from giving to God and say, well, I already gave that much, I'm keeping this for myself. Actually, we're not robbing God. We're robbing ourselves. Because the more we hold back, the less we get blessed, and the less we can see God work in our life. Now I know a lot of today's young people grew up in the society that everything is about me, myself, and I. And that we watch television, we watch movies and entertainment, and a lot of the advertisements in this world are just do whatever you want. Make yourself great. Do for yourself. And many young people that I talk to, when I speak at school and other youth events, I tell them, give everything to God. And they look at me like, what? I have to give everything to God? Well, what about me? What about myself? What? And they don't understand the concept of when we give ourselves to God, He knows better how to control our life than we do. Someone once said, give God your life. He can do a lot more with it than you can. Back in the 1900s, the founder of the Salvation Army was going to send a telegram to his Salvation Army people overseas. But because this was during the time of war, and funds were very low, he only had enough money to send one word. So he sent a telegraph message with the one word, others. And in my own life, I have come to realize that others, putting others first, is what life is about. I often tell people when I speak, Jesus first, others second, and yourself last, spells joy. And for me, in my own experience, I know that that is true. For when I live my life for myself, which I'm human, and I make mistakes, and I make wrong choices, and when I put myself first, I find myself miserable. But when I put God first, and others second, and myself last, the peace and the joy is unexplainable. You cannot explain it. You have to try it for yourself. 43 years ago, God gave me cancer. And many people ask me, well, Joshua, you must be mad at God for destroying your life by giving you cancer. But you know what I've learned in these 43 years? God wasn't destroying my life when He gave me cancer. God was creating my life. God had a plan. And I've come to find out His plan is perfect.